says Natalie Wood apparently slipped, hit her head, and...
The coroner's office said today that actress Natalie Wood was intoxicated and angry after an argument between...
Attempted to board this rubber dinghy. It was here that she fell.
It's been more than 4 decades since the mysterious death of Hollywood icon Natalie Wood shocked the world. Yet even today, the truth remains tangled in secrecy, suspicion, and heartbreak. On that cold November night in 1981, Natalie's lifeless body was found floating off the coast of California, near Catalina Island. The actress, only 43 at the time, had vanished from the yacht she shared with her husband, actor Robert Wagner, and friend Christopher Walken. The story captured headlines for years. Was it a tragic accident or something far darker? For decades, Robert Wagner stayed mostly silent. The man once known as one half of Hollywood's golden couple became the center of controversy, haunted by whispers and accusations he never fully escaped. His love for Natalie had always been passionate and complicated, a relationship marked by both devotion and jealousy. But now, at 95, Robert Wagner has finally decided to break his silence. In a rare and deeply emotional revelation, Wagner opens up about that fateful night, the decades of guilt that followed, and what he claims really happened before Natalie disappeared into the dark waters. His words are both heartbreaking and shocking, not only because of what he admits, but because of what he still cannot bring himself to say. After all these years, could this be the moment when the mystery surrounding Natalie Wood's death is finally put to rest? Or has Robert Wagner's confession only deepened the questions that have haunted Hollywood for over 40 years? Before the tragedy that would define both their lives, Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood were the very image of Hollywood perfection. Their story began in the 1950s, an age of glamour, studio contracts, and silver screen legends. Natalie, the child star who had charmed audiences since Miracle on 34th Street, was already a household name. Robert, with his matinee idol looks and polished charm, was one of the industry's rising leading men. Together, they represented the kind of romantic fantasy moviegoers adored. Beautiful, talented, and madly in love. When they married in 1957, Natalie was just 19 and Robert was 27. Their union made headlines across the world, celebrated as a fairy tale romance. But beneath the red carpets and adoring photographs, their relationship was far more complicated. Natalie's fame was soaring, while Robert's career at times struggled to keep up. Hollywood's fascination with their marriage often created more pressure than passion. Friends from that era would later say that their love was real, but so were the insecurities. Robert adored Natalie, but was intensely protective and sometimes possessive. Natalie, for her part, longed for both freedom and affection. They divorced in 1962 after years of tension, yet neither ever truly moved on. A decade later, in 1972, they remarried, older, wiser, and hopeful that time had healed the wounds. They bought a yacht they named Splendor, a symbol of their rekindled love. To outsiders, it seemed like a storybook ending. But what happened aboard that yacht years later would turn their fairy tale into a haunting mystery. On the night of November 28, 1981, Natalie and Robert set sail for Catalina Island with actor Christopher Walken, who was co-starring with Natalie in the film Brainstorm. The evening began with laughter, drinks, and memories shared among friends. But as the night deepened, so did the tension. Witnesses on nearby boats later claimed to have heard shouting, a mix of anger, fear, and heartbreak echoing across the water. By morning, Natalie was gone. Her body was found hours later, floating face down in the Pacific, wearing a red jacket and nightgown. The world was stunned. The coroner ruled her death an accidental drowning, but questions surfaced immediately. How did an experienced swimmer fall into the water unnoticed? Why had no one heard her cries for help? Robert Wagner, devastated and visibly broken, said little publicly. In his grief, he withdrew, and the speculation grew louder. The tabloids painted him as both a grieving husband and a potential suspect. Hollywood's golden couple had become the center of one of the industry's darkest mysteries. For years, Wagner's silence fueled endless theories. Some believed jealousy over Walken's friendship with Natalie had sparked a heated argument. Others thought alcohol and emotional volatility had created a perfect storm. Yet through it all, Robert maintained his love for Natalie, calling her the love of my life, and insisting her death was nothing more than a tragic accident. Still, the world refused to forget. Investigators revisited the case multiple times over the decades, each time uncovering new inconsistencies, bruises on Natalie's body, shifting witness statements, and unanswered questions about that fateful night. Now, at 95, Robert Wagner is finally ready to tell his side of the story, not to clear his name, but to find peace before it's too late. He claims that what happened that night was not murder, but a heartbreaking accident rooted in misunderstanding, fear, and love pushed to its breaking point. But can the truth ever truly heal the pain that's lasted for more than 40 years? Or is this revelation just another chapter in a mystery that refuses to die? The night of November 28, 1981 began like countless others for Robert Wagner and Natalie Wood, glamorous, romantic, and touched with a hint of Hollywood excess. The couple had been spending the Thanksgiving weekend aboard their yacht, Splendor, anchored near Catalina Island. Joining them were Natalie's Brainstorm co-star, Christopher Walken, and the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern. What was meant to be a relaxing getaway soon spiraled into one of the most tragic nights in Hollywood history. The evening started peacefully. The four dined together, shared drinks, and talked about Natalie's film career. But as the alcohol flowed, the atmosphere shifted. According to later accounts, tension began to simmer between Robert and Christopher. Wagner reportedly grew jealous, believing Walken was becoming too close to his wife. Natalie, who was known for her kindness and gentle spirit, tried to defuse the situation, but years of underlying tension between her and Robert began to rise to the surface. Witnesses on nearby boats recalled hearing shouting coming from the Splendor sometime after 10 p.m. The argument, they said, carried across the dark water, a mixture of anger, tears, and confusion. At some point, Natalie left the cabin and vanished into the night. When the crew realized she was missing, panic set in. The yacht's dinghy and a small inflatable boat was also gone. Robert immediately assumed Natalie had taken it out, perhaps to cool off after the argument. But when hours passed with no sign of her, fear began to take over. Around 1 a.m., the Coast Guard was contacted. By sunrise, their worst fears were confirmed. Natalie's body was found floating less than a mile from the yacht. The news sent shockwaves through Hollywood. Natalie Wood, the radiant star of West Side Story and Rebel Without a Cause, was gone. The initial coroner's report ruled her death an accidental drowning, suggesting she had slipped while trying to secure the dinghy. But even in those first few days, not everyone was convinced. There were bruises on her arms and legs, a scratch on her face, and the haunting detail that she was terrified of dark water and could barely swim. In the days that followed, Robert Wagner was consumed with grief and guilt. He wept openly at her funeral, surrounded by friends, co-stars, and an entire industry in mourning. Yet while many sympathized with his heartbreak, others whispered about what might have really happened that night. Why had it taken so long to call for help? Why had the argument turned so heated? And why did Wagner avoid questions from detectives in the days immediately after? Over the years, the mystery only deepened. In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the case after the yacht's captain, Dennis Davern, publicly admitted that he hadn't told the full truth the first time. Davern claimed Wagner had been angry and that he believed the couple's fight played a direct role in Natalie's death. Soon after, Wagner was officially named a person of interest, though never charged. For decades, Robert Wagner maintained his silence, refusing to give interviews about the tragedy that defined his life. But as he entered his 90s, that silence began to weigh heavily on him. Friends say he became more reflective, even remorseful. He began to speak privately about that night, not in defense, but in sorrow. In his late-life confession, Wagner insists that Natalie's death was a horrible accident, one that has haunted him every single day since. He admitted that they had argued, that emotions had run high, but denied any violence or intent. "If I could go back to that night," he said, "I would have done everything differently." Those words, after more than 40 years of silence, have reignited both sympathy and suspicion. Was it truly an accident fueled by heartbreak? Or has Hollywood's greatest mystery simply grown darker with time? As the sun sank behind the horizon on November 28, 1981, the splendor floated quietly off the coast of Catalina Island. On board were 4 people: Robert Wagner, Natalie Wood, actor Christopher Walken, and the boat's captain, Dennis Davern. What should have been a peaceful evening quickly spiraled into one of Hollywood's darkest mysteries. The night began with laughter, clinking glasses, and soft music echoing across the deck. But beneath the surface, tension brewed. Reports later suggested that Natalie and Christopher were deep in conversation about her career, a discussion that Robert allegedly interpreted as flirtation. For a man already known to be fiercely protective of his wife, that was enough to ignite sparks. According to later testimonies, voices were raised, and arguments echoed across the deck. The boat captain, Davern, claimed he heard shouting between Wagner and Wood, followed by a sudden silence. Moments later, Natalie was gone, her absence unnoticed until it was far too late. When her body was discovered hours later, floating face down in the dark waters, wearing a red jacket and flannel nightgown, the world froze. Hollywood's golden couple had been shattered in one unimaginable night. The official report called it an accident, death by drowning and other undetermined factors. But few believed that simple explanation. Rumors spread like wildfire. Was it a fight gone wrong? Was jealousy to blame? Or was there something more sinister? In the years that followed, Robert Wagner withdrew from the spotlight. He rarely spoke about that night except in carefully measured words. "Nobody knows," he once said. "Nobody will ever know." Yet those words only deepened the mystery. The boat captain's later statements painted a different story, one where Wagner's temper flared, and Natalie, frightened, tried to leave the yacht. Davern claimed Wagner refused to turn on the searchlights immediately after realizing she was missing, a delay that may have cost Natalie her life. But even decades later, Wagner maintained his innocence. "There was no fight worth someone dying for," he said in a later interview, his voice trembling with regret. "I've spent my life asking the same questions the world asks of me." In 2011, the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department reopened the investigation, citing new witness accounts and inconsistencies in the original autopsy. The case was reclassified from accidental drowning to drowning with undetermined factors. Robert Wagner, then in his 80s, was officially named a person of interest. For the first time, he faced renewed scrutiny, not as a beloved actor, but as the man who might hold the final piece of a haunting puzzle. Yet through all the accusations, Wagner stood firm, saying he had no secrets and nothing to hide. But those closest to Natalie never stopped searching for answers. Her sister, Lana Wood, spent years pleading for justice, publicly accusing Wagner of withholding the truth. "Natalie was terrified of water," she once said. "She wouldn't have gone near that dinghy alone." That's what I can't get past. The mystery took on a life of its own. Books, documentaries, and endless theories. Some say Natalie slipped while trying to secure the dinghy. Others believe she was trying to escape a heated argument. No matter the version, one truth remains. The only 2 people who truly knew what happened that night were Natalie and Robert, and only one lived to tell the tale. Now, at 95, Robert Wagner's reflections carry the weight of a lifetime. In his later interviews, his tone softened. "There isn't a day I don't think of her," he admitted. "If I could change that night, I would." His voice cracked as he spoke, his words revealing the grief he once kept buried. But whether those words were a confession, an apology, or simply the voice of a man haunted by loss, only he knows. For the world, the mystery of Natalie Wood's death remains one of Hollywood's most enduring tragedies, a story of love, jealousy, and unanswered questions drifting forever across the waters of Catalina Island. As Robert Wagner reached his twilight years, the noise surrounding Natalie Wood's death never truly faded. Every few years, headlines would resurface, reopening wounds that never fully healed. Interviews, documentaries, and police updates kept dragging his name back into the shadows of suspicion. Yet through it all, Wagner continued to live quietly, refusing to let the whispers define the man he had become. By the time he turned 95, his once sharp features had softened, but the weight of memory still lived behind his eyes. Those who have met him in recent years describe a man more reflective than defensive, someone who no longer runs from the ghosts of his past, but quietly speaks to them. "You learn to live with what you can't change," he once said in a rare interview. And sometimes, what you can't change is what defines you. Over time, Wagner began to open up more about his relationship with Natalie. He recalled their early years together, how they met when she was just a teenager and he was already a rising star. Their love story was the kind Hollywood once adored, glamorous, passionate, and full of second chances. They divorced, only to remarry years later, believing love would conquer the mistakes of youth. "We had something real," Wagner said softly, "something you can't just rewrite." But the tragedy that tore them apart forever left questions that no answer could soothe. Even as Wagner aged, the public demanded clarity. Why didn't he help her sooner? Why was there arguing that night? Why did Natalie end up in the water if she was so afraid of it? These questions became the eternal chorus that followed him wherever he went. In 2018, the renewed investigation brought Wagner back into the spotlight once again. Detectives described his statements as inconsistent, and though he was never charged, the implication was heavy. "All evidence points to the fact that he was the last person with her," one investigator said. The comment struck like a final blow, a reminder that no amount of time could erase the suspicion that lingered in the public's mind. Still, Wagner remained silent on specifics, but those close to him say he has privately made peace with what happened. Friends describe moments when he would sit in silence, gazing out toward the ocean, the same vast expanse that took the love of his life. "He doesn't talk much about that night anymore," one confidant shared. "But you can tell it never leaves him. It's written in his eyes." In his 2016 memoir, Pieces of My Heart, Wagner wrote about Natalie with deep affection and remorse. He didn't confess to wrongdoing, but he acknowledged the immense pain of losing her. "I loved her then, I love her now, and I always will," he wrote. "But some nights when I close my eyes, I still see her face, and I wonder if she knows how sorry I am." Those words, heavy, haunting, and filled with longing, offered perhaps the closest thing to a confession he would ever give. Natalie's family, however, still seeks closure. Her sister Lana continues to speak publicly about the inconsistencies in the case. "It's not about blaming anyone anymore," she said in a 2021 interview. "It's about understanding what really happened." Natalie deserves that truth, and perhaps, in his own quiet way, Robert Wagner does too. Now, at 95, Robert spends his days surrounded by family and memories, photos of his Hollywood years, the sound of waves outside his window, and the haunting reminder of a love that ended too soon. He once said, "When you lose someone that way, you don't ever stop hearing their voice." Maybe that's why, even after all these years, the truth remains as murky as the waters that claimed Natalie Wood's life. Whether it was fate, accident, or something darker, only Robert knows the full story, and it seems he will take that truth with him to the grave. For the world, the mystery will forever drift between rumor and reality. For Robert Wagner, it's a lifelong echo, the sound of heartbreak carried by the sea.